Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so there's this New York Times podcast that's going viral sort of elsewhere on the internet from where it's posted, which is an interview with Hasan. And it's getting picked up on like Twitter and I don't know, maybe TikTok and stuff. I've seen a decent amount of people talk about it. Fox News played clips from this interview a bunch of times, but the interview itself only has like 11,000 views. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. Maybe like it was most prominently posted somewhere else or something like that. There's a few things that are a little bit odd about this discourse, but yet again, Hasan Piker is being scolded or upheld as an example of the left being too edgy, the left going too far. And it's an interesting interview here. I have some criticisms of it, but really it's all just like aesthetics. You know, the reason people react even to something like this is mostly because of aesthetics. And there's some edgy statements that get made here and there, but really it's just kind of like a bougie setting. It's like, it's a little too ritzy, I think, for a conversation like this. Makes it seem very out of touch and tasteless. So you'll see what I mean in a second, and then we'll get into like more about what they're saying here. Hasan is talking to this journalist, Jia Tolentino, who I don't know much about, but she works for The New Yorker and seems to have an eye for like controversial or hot button topics. It's been a little bit more like socially focused in the past, I will say, but what she's saying here is very class focused. I like what she has to say here, so I thought it was overall a pretty good conversation here. So here is Hasan Piker talking to Jia Tolentino and Naja Spiegelman as the moderator.
I'm pro stealing from big corporations because, you know, they steal quite a bit more from their own workers. However, one thing that might even help your ethical dilemma is the fact that the automated process that they design, these companies know will increase shrink, right? So it's actually factored in. The lemons that you stole are factored into the bottom line of these mega corporations regardless, and they still end up having increased profit margins because they no longer have to pay the cashiers that they used to hire, as opposed to this automated system, knowing full well that people are still going to be able to still steal a lot more efficiently, as a matter of fact, through the automated process.
Totally. Well, I was looking things up, and shrinkage is roughly equal internally as externally. Like they expect it from their employees that they are sort of disenfranchising constantly.
Yeah. But what about the argument that if everyone just starts stealing wantonly from these self-checkout machines, Whole Foods will eventually raise the prices?
Yeah, chaos, full chaos. Let's go. I mean, look, I'm in favor of fast and free buses and also government-owned storefronts, and two of those policies the mayor of this beautiful city is currently working on.
Would you encourage stealing in the same way from a Mamdani run city-owned grocery store with lower prices, and why?
I would not, because I feel like that's taxpayer funded, and the prices are this union labor, and the prices are also adjusted regardless.
I think that hypothetical is interesting, right? Because if you look at it from a categorical imperative type thing, what if everybody did this? You know, the converse is like, oh, what if every major grocery chain stole from workers and consumers? And that is basically true, right? Like, it's interesting. Like, I think it speaks to the thing where a kind of harm committed by the individual strangely continually draws more ire than the same harm being committed by a structure. And so I kind of am inclined towards this. It's like,
all right, so this is just the first clip, and I wanted to stop it here because this is where there's a noticeable flaw in this argument, because he says, supporting this idea of stealing from corporations, etc., and I think many people share that idea. And then the question comes up, would you steal from like Zohran Mamdani's publicly funded grocery store? And he says no. And that's all well and good. I think that honestly makes sense. I do believe that's like coherent on a moral level. But the problem is if you reinforce the idea of stealing and also just open up the idea that people indulging in that urge, whether it's necessary, kind of necessary, not necessary at all, there's no reason that they wouldn't do that also. at a public grocery store, just currently based on how conditions are now and how people's understanding of these things are now. Now, it's not a fatal flaw in the argument because that could change. It's not inconceivable that society in America could be more oriented towards people understanding why you don't steal from a public grocery store versus a corporate grocery store. And I think that understanding exists, but I don't think it's there enough that in a major city it's going to prevent people from stealing from a publicly funded grocery store. I think that's a problem that might come up, frankly, and it's going to be something that works against a program like a publicly funded grocery store until the conditions are met that bring the prices down, which will reduce people's need and subconscious desire to steal from larger corporations. And I'm not sure where this idea of like micro looting came from. She says at the beginning of this interview, the Spiegelman lady who works for New York Times, she said that she's, floating this new term, micro looting, which is apparently this trend of people stealing from Whole Foods and other stores like it. So that's been a thing for a while, obviously. Apparently it's like a TikTok trend. I haven't heard anything like that or anything about that, but that's what they kind of called this conversation in for, which I find kind of interesting because this is New York Times and they're the ones kind of framing this story about stealing from corporations as some kind of political act and wanting to call attention to that in the similar way that they do something like quiet quitting, right? Or like negative trends that they notice among the people that they want to say like, hey, we see you doing that. And so I think that's what's going on with this conversation here. Like I said, I think the aesthetic makes this look kind of, bourgeois, frankly. And that's the biggest criticism that Hasan gets. And it is what it is. I don't think that it's really the kind of thing that you should worry about too much, but it's why New York Times, particularly, I think in general, that's how I feel about their content. That's how I feel about Ezra Klein's content as well. It's just so like self-serious, I guess. And, so the vibes in this conversation are decent. You could tell the Spiegelman lady is pushing back a little bit or trying to guide this conversation. And they talk about things like social murder as well as America's desensitization to murder in general and how, starting to see those senseless deaths kind of targeted in different directions and talking about the class dynamics of that. And so that's really what this conversation is about here. And it's becoming an example among people of Hasan being like, an edgy radical or, bourgeois radical, again, because of the aesthetic here. But everything he's saying, I think, makes a lot of sense. And I think it's good, even if there are, criticisms to be had about like the aesthetic or the attitude or approach of this person or that person. Ultimately, I think it's good that conversations like this are starting to be had and starting to have some appeal. And with this Tolentino lady, just looking briefly into some of her past stuff that was more noticed, it was more focused on like the social pulse of politics, race and gender and that sort of thing, which is fine. Plenty of left-leaning, left-oriented people have talked about that sort of thing, but this is a much more class and economics-focused conversation. And so the fact that Hasan is able to bring a little bit more appeal to a conversation like that is a good thing. And I think that's in no small part due to the willingness that he has to say things that are a little edgy or whatever. And that's starting to piss people off on the right and on the liberal side. The liberals are consistently now getting frustrated about Hasan, even though his participation in the Michigan primary seemed to have a decent effect, where it actually may have had a positive effect on Abdul El Sayed's polling numbers in Michigan so far. So we'll see how that shakes out. He's actually going to campaign with Chakrabarti in San Francisco. That was the one that AOC used to work with. He used to campaign with AOC or something, and she kind of waffled on endorsing him, which led to some drama. Haven't really got the chance to cover that, but Hasan is dipping more into electoral politics, which is a risky thing for streamers to do. It's risky for candidates, and we'll see how the effect of that is going forward, because they're definitely on the establishment side focusing in on that as a point of attack. And it's about time that we had some figures and some rhetoric and some memes and some ways of talking about popularly understood issues that had a little bit of an edge to it and a little bit of an appeal to it. And frankly, I think it's just that portion of the conversation growing, which is going to happen, no matter what people do to try to shut down that conversation. So real quick, just to get to the last part of their conversation that they had here, and then I'll wrap it up.
I want to get back a little bit to the anger underneath this. Like in 1965, CEOs were paid 21 times the average worker. In 2024, CEOs are paid 281 times the average worker. I feel like some of this is coming from a feeling of like the social contract is broken. And then there's also the slippery slope of what happens if we completely break the social contract and no one plays by the rules anymore. And I wonder where you two see the interplay of those two ideas.
Well, the rules are already designed in a way where if you steal from the poor, you become rich. If you steal from the wealthy, you go to prison. So there's only one direction where you can do unlimited theft and erode the social contract for the 99%. There's an invisibility baked into the system that allows the wealthy to engage in this sort of behavior.
The ideal world is one in which the theft from above is broken by regulatory means and or bottom up means like unionization, right?
But then when you feel this much anger and it doesn't feel like there's hope for it to be changed in a regulatory way, I think that's when you get to things like killing the CEO of United Healthcare and there being an outpouring of glee for murder online because it feels like finally someone can actually do something about healthcare. I think 40% of Gen Zers felt that murder was morally justified. But it's scary to be in a society where people feel that murder is morally justified. And I'm curious how we thread that line.
Yeah, Engels wrote about the concept of social murder. And Brian Thompson, as the United Healthcare CEO, was engaging in a tremendous amount of social murder, the systematized forms of violence, the structural violence of poverty, the for-profit paywalled system of healthcare in this country. And the consequences of that are tremendous amounts of pain, tremendous amounts of violence, tremendous amounts of deaths. And that was a fascinating story for me because Americans are very draconian about crime and punishment. They're very black and white on this issue. And yet, because of the pervasive pain that the private healthcare system had created for the average American, I saw so many people immediately understand why this death had taken place. Even before they knew who the shooter was or what the motive was, we had universalized this pain. So much so that virtually every American has a similar experience, a shared experience.
You know?
I wonder with something like murder, like the murder of a healthcare CEO, is it just a release valve for anger or is it actually effective political action? Has anything shifted in terms of healthcare in this country because of that?
I felt enormously frustrated in the weeks following that every single, I assumed, I don't know why I thought that Democrats would immediately take this up as pushing a sort of unified message towards universal health care. I don't know why I expected that. I don't know why I was disappointed that it didn't happen.
Elizabeth Warren did it to her credit.
Sure, but you know what I mean? I thought it would be, I don't know, and I don't know why I expected that. But I do not think that it was effective political action. I do think it was an effective act of political consciousness raising, but I don't think that's action at all. I do think it was served up for someone to just spike that ball over the other side, and that did not happen at all. But I think, and I find that kind of one of the most egregious missed opportunities that we have seen in recent political history.
There are people like Zoran out there. They're and they're just waiting to be elected and waiting to come into a position of power and show the rest of the country that no, you can actually do things. You can do.
Okay, so governance. Here they're talking about healthcare. They're talking about Luigi Mangione, and at the end you can see how Hasan oscillates back and forth between talking about this, frankly, more fundamentally violent form of politics, which is the politics of class consciousness, class warfare. Because the only way to fight class warfare from the bottom up is to strike. at your oppressor. And so Hasan understands that. He talks about that clearly, but then he also says that like his ideal form of a politician is Zoran Mamdani, right? So that's the kind of maneuver that really frustrates people that hate Hasan, because they want his politics to be objectively violent, that Hasan is advocating for violence and wants violence to happen. And that is why this conversation is going viral, getting attention, because they're saying things that hint at that. But again, really what they're talking about is class politics, and they're talking about things that everybody can relate to. Now, this is where I could say that I think the language that is used in a lot of these conversations may be kind of esoteric, because again, we're talking about things that are understood by everybody on a broad level. Like everybody experiences this with groceries, and apparently it's becoming this broad trend of stealing from, you know, major chains, which I see no problem with personally. I don't make a habit of doing that, but not for any moral reasons. And I think that they are correctly identifying that these are cultural trends tied to class politics, tied to a rise in class politics, especially on places like TikTok. This is the kind of stuff that leftists should find good ways to talk about, good ways to tie into politics. And that is why Hasan is able to point to Zoran Mamdani, because he's done a good job of doing that. And he's done a good job of translating it into a sustainable form of politics, at least so far. And Zoran has taken certain steps to make sure that his governing style is balanced enough to do things like address the budget deficit, doing his taxation plans in different ways than he had originally planned. And that was the kind of thing that I knew Zoran would have to do, especially in a big city like New York. And for leftists and people specifically espousing class politics and politics about the 1% and, you know, theft of surplus labor, being able to connect that with like real solid governance and candidates that win and are appealing and also can govern well and aren't perceived as like ignoring certain social problems that may be inconvenient from a progressive perspective to address. That's the kind of thing that's going to be faced with anybody running for mayor, any kind of executive position, like in California with Steyer. Hopefully Steyer wins in California. That's another topic, because you now see this surge of the candidate Becerra, because after Eric Swalwell dropped out of the race for governor in California, it started looking like Tom Steyer would win. And this is a billionaire candidate who has interviewed with Hasan before. He actually ran for president in 2020. He was the one who gave us the hi Bernie, I'm a big fan, and Bernie says yeah, good, okay, on the debate stage. So that guy has a solid shot of running for California governor. It's kind of a toss-up right now. There's a Republican candidate who has a decent amount of support, probably would never get across the finish line, but definitely is enough to make things interesting. So we'll see. So Tom Steyer, I think, is the favorable candidate there, because he is essentially a billionaire espousing class trade or politics, you know, and saying that he's going to use the resources he has to not only float his own campaign for governor, but also go after the billionaire class. So we'll see. I mean, can we trust a billionaire to do that? No, not necessarily. Can we trust him as much as any Democrat? Yeah, I guess so, especially because being a billionaire, this is part of what helped Trump, is it, you know, separated him from the crowd in terms of having to hit the ground running when it comes to donations and funding. Trump can move money around and figure out ways to finance himself in a pinch, as well as securing deals with donors and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it helps in terms of having some independence on the political stage, and that has allowed Tom Steyer to differentiate himself a little bit. And so, you know, the appeal of a candidate like Becerra, to the extent that it's going to bear out, we'll see. He is a Democrat, but he's speaking more from this like practical politics type of level, because I do think that there's some appeal for that, especially when people feel like Democrats and liberals are neglecting that. So the job of leftists is going to be to capture as much ground on this class politics level as possible and speak to these things in an understandable way, that, you know, these corporations are robbing you. So clawing back that wealth in any way we can is just a trend that's going to happen in society. People shouldn't feel bad if they have a need to steal to eat, because that is the direction that society's pressing upon them. And a lot of people are feeling that pressure. But that's obviously not the ideal organization either. And the ideal organization is for people not to feel so much economic pressure by these giant conglomerates raising the prices, jacking the prices up, an administration that is just so openly corrupt, never been more corrupt than this. Doesn't matter what you thought of politics before this, this is as much corruption as we've ever seen out in the open. It is a feeding frenzy. And so there's going to be a huge mess to be cleaned up after this, but it's going to leave a lot of opportunity for these class problems to be addressed, because people are starting to notice that that's the one thing we're not fucking addressing. But the only people who are going to be able to like really acknowledge that and really capture people's attention on that is people on the left, people who are talking about like pretty far left class politics, because at this point we've gone very far to the right, especially on economics, also on social issues. And so, you know, moderation is not the answer. And I think even the Democratic base of voters understands that at this point. And so whether the screamers and what do you call them, the pants wetters, the bed wetters, whatever, whether they like it or not, this is the direction politics are going. And I think it's, you know, not above criticism, but it's also a good thing.